Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. As always, it's me, Scott Martin, from Bonsai Matsu in sunny old Melbourne, Victoria. It's mid-May 2021, and today I've got a bit of a surprise and a bit of a treat for everybody. Today I'm going to be interviewing Jarryd Bailey from Montane Bonsai. Yeah, a bit of background on Jarryd. He's one of the nicest blokes you'll ever meet in the world of bonsai, let alone bonsai in Australia. He's very talented, very knowledgeable on native species, and he's developing and growing quite a reputation and collection of native species down in Tasmania, down near Hobart. So I would strongly suggest you have a good listen to what he's got to say, and also, if you get the chance, reach out and get in touch with him, because it may be something that you'd want to do if you want to extend your bonsai collection into the native realm, especially some of the brilliant stock they've got down in Tasmania. So I hope you enjoy this interview. It's the first one we've done on bonsai stuff. I've actually just recorded it and really enjoyed it. So hope you guys get as much out of it as what I do. So sit back, relax, grab yourself a nice coffee, cold beer, whatever it is. Get your tweezers and your scissors out, start working on your trees, and enjoy this one. All right, so now we've got a special guest on the Bonsai Stuff podcast. Jarryd Bailey is joining us down in Tasmania. So I'm in Melbourne, Victoria. He's in Tasmania, and thanks to the help of some great technology, we're able to have a bit of a chat, and I thought I'd bring a bit of another aspect or another opinion, I suppose, to how bonsai should be managed or looked after. So, Jarryd, welcome, mate. Montane Bonsai down in Tasmania. Just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your podcast, Scott. It's good to catch up with you and have a chat. So I'm down here in Tasmania, just outside of Hobart in Collinsvale, and I run sort of a small nursery on the northern slopes of Mount Wellington, specialising primarily in Tasmanian native plants. With a small selection of other exotics as well now. But yeah, we're predominantly focused on Tasmanian native plants here.
Beautiful. So just a little bit about yourself, I suppose, like, you know, how long you've been into bonsai, what got you interested, all that, just a bit of background for everyone.
Yeah, sure. So started bonsai when I saw a collection come into my neighbour's yard. So it was sort of an estate sale where bonsai had changed hands, and all of a sudden there was a collection sitting on the neighbour's back veranda. So I went over one day and it was the sort of typical northern New South Wales species, a lot of ficus, a few lily pillies, bits and pieces like that. And that sort of piqued my interest. So convinced mum and dad to buy me a little ficus bonsai of my own, just still ticking along.
Nice.
It's still alive up at the family home. It's one of the few bonsai I've kept from the early days. But yeah, then just like, I remember I didn't really know much about bonsai. So the educational side of things was self-directed to begin with. Was that like the rest of us, through books and magazines and that sort of stuff? Yeah, a little bit. So books at the local library, but also I did join a club eventually, but initially it was early bonsai forums. So Bonsai Web, IBC, Bonsai Talk, and then eventually Oz Bonsai when that came onto the scene. Mm-hmm. So that was originally, my initial access to information was through those forums.
How did you find that minefield of information?
Yeah, it's hard to navigate, but a lot of trial and error, a lot of misinformation at times. But often, you come to learn, and it's something I've heard you say a lot, is, you look at people's trees, that's the truth is in the trees, so sooner or later you start to see trends of quality coming from certain people, and then you look to them for information of substance. I found
definitely, yeah. So there must have been something which switched your sort of learning that way to making it more more succinct, I suppose, in how you want to learn, and you made a decision. What was the catalyst for that?
So I guess, joining the local club is a huge catalyst in hands-on learning. There's only so much you can learn through books and, online or all that sort of thing. So I met Barrington and Elaine Chi at the Summerland Bonsai Society in Lismore. And the quality of their trees was exceptionally good. And so, Barrington and Elaine invited me around, and I visited their garden, and, they taught me how to repot correctly, all the basics. And I remember Barrington said to me one time, you got to get your priorities straight, because I'm a young man and, doing all the things like playing football and that sort of stuff. And, so that was, that sort of indicated to me that there's a more serious side to this. And then I went on to do, visit the AABC and had some of the traveling tutors, and, to get some overseas insight was quite interesting and learn a few different techniques from them.
Yep. So when did you make the decision to head overseas and study? Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I went to university and studied like a degree in marine science, and that was how I ended up in Tasmania. After I finished university, I'd been around a few different areas, Lismore, Ballina, then down to Coffs Harbour, the National Marine Science Centre down there. I was working with New South Wales Fisheries on an internship, and then went to Tasmania, working with the salmon farming industry down there, doing fish health auditing. And I was working at one of the southernmost ports down there, Dover, or down here rather. So I did that for sort of 3 years, and decided that wasn't for me. And so I thought, well, what other skills do I have? I'm sort of abandoning this career path. And I had always wanted to, do something more serious with bonsai. I did initially, think, in those younger days when people were asking me, what do you want to do? I was like thinking maybe it would be nice to go to Japan and do an apprenticeship, but that never came to fruition. So once I decided I was ready to wrap up working out on the ocean every day, I needed a tree change essentially. And bonsai was it. I had the collections that had already, accumulated over a few years while I'd been here. Just decided maybe I'll take it a bit more seriously and try and forge a career path out of it.
So why did you choose, you studied, you want to go into your study overseas, who you chose and how you came to that decision? Yeah. So, after I decided I'd had enough working out on the ocean, we decided we'd like to go to America. And at the time there was a lot of media coming out of sort of that Pacific Northwest area, and I found it interesting because they were creating a lot of new trees from, raw material, either whether it was field grown or collected trees. So, we went on a bit of a grand tree tour, essentially up the West Coast, visited the sequoias, went to Yosemite, out to the Bristol Cones, came over Carson's Pass, saw all the giant, the really old Sierra junipers up there. Eventually ended up in Portland. And I sort of reached out to both Michael Hagedorn and Ryan Neal. So there's 3 artists in the area whose work I'd been sort of studying quite closely. Yep. Michael Hagedorn, Ryan Neal, and Dan Robinson as well. And so I thought, well, I'll go and visit each of these gardens. And at the time, I really was essentially fishing around for someone to learn some more, in-depth knowledge about bonsai from. And so each of them, I contacted them when I got to, me and my partner Hannah were traveling together, and we pulled up in a hostel in Portland. And Portland's a great city. So that was pretty fun. We spent a bit of time, cruising around Portland and seeing the sights. But we were waiting
waiting to hear back essentially from these nurseries to see if we could go and visit them. And Michael got back to me and said, yeah, in a week's time he can come and visit. And it was a similar scenario with Ryan. So we drove out to Mount Hood, camped out on the slopes of Mount Hood for a couple of nights, and then we went out to the Pink Hills and we went and visited some hot springs in the area. Just did a few touristy things to kill some time. Got back to Michael's garden. I think that was the first garden we visited. And just blown away by the quality. And after spending a lot of time, visiting forests in the area, I could really see the influence, in particular, of tall forests on Michael's work. Especially coming into the garden, the big hemlock clump there, which is it's quite a massive piece. I imagine if you've seen a photo of it.
Very well known. Yeah, a lot of people would have seen that.
Yeah, so that piece, that blew me away as an entry piece, and I really clicked well with Michael. I found, but it was just almost fortuitous that he had one of the seasonal classes coming up. When I was asking him about sort of potential for further education with him, and so he had one of the seasonals coming up. So I signed up to do a single one-off seasonal with Michael. I met a few of the other people that were sort of around the garden at the time, and I found that they were all really, really interesting people. People like Matt Reel was there at the time, and Tyler Sherrod. So I got to meet them and sit down and have a beer with them one night, which was great. But then I went out to Ryan's garden, and again, this crazy quality of trees, really good trees. And I met Hugh there, actually.
Oh, right.
I met Hugh for the first time.
Yep.
And Ryan's garden was great too. And the amount of work, I would have been really happy to have studied there as well. But yeah, when I went back and did the seasonal with Michael, just found that his style of educating really suited my style of learning.
You connected with it, yeah.
Yeah, and I really liked the garden, and I really liked the trees he was creating as well. You could see a clear Japanese influence, from the long-term period he'd spent studying with Shinji Suzuki. But there was also a creativity to the work and a playfulness, which I really enjoyed. So
he's definitely got a playfulness to him. I think that's the perfect word to describe. I don't know him personally, but from reading his blogs and seeing what he's done, he's definitely got a great sense of humour. Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed that. I think I would have struggled going to Japan potentially with that sort of really hierarchical model of study. I found Michael to be really approachable, and I really liked if I had a question I could ask, even if it was something that might not have been, not the most intelligent question. It was never scoffed at,
So how long were you there for? How long did you end up staying for?
So on that trip, that was the first trip over. That was just, I just did one of the 3-day seasonals, and then I came back for a further 3 months of study. I was supposed to stay on with Michael for, a full apprenticeship, which was what we'd sort of agreed on initially. But yeah, life back home sort of changed,
Yeah, life back home definitely has an influence on these things. These long-term apprenticeships, they sound great and they feel great at the time, but they can definitely have a draw on you too with your personal life and things outside of the bonsai world.
So, I imagine you understand you've got a family, and I pretty much a few weeks, no, it was 2 weeks before I went over to America to start the apprenticeship, me and Hannah got married. So we didn't get to go on that.
I mean, here's your honeymoon. I'm going to leave you now.
Yeah, we didn't even get to. We still, and that that's still a point of contention, But she's always been really supportive of my journey with bonsai.
I think that's if you look at anyone who's successful in bonsai anywhere around the world, and I think there's always someone behind them that's their rock that sort of supports them. That's very common.
Yeah. And because Hannah needed somewhere to live while I was away, we bought this little house in Tasmania that turns out needed a huge amount of work. But, so between that and then heading off, so.
So how did it end? Like, was it amicable at the end when you he would have understood your personal circumstances, and the need to sort of put the apprenticeship on pause and head back home?
Yeah. So it's still it's still an open agreement. If I want to go back, me and Michael have discussed that too, and I would like to return because there's still definitely more I can learn from working with Michael. It was amicable. In fact, I left with the intention of coming back, but then when I got home, just realised that I can't go back.
So you get back, so you come back, you leave, you're freshly married, you've bought a new property, you've been overseas, you've had training, you get homesick, you come home. What changed in your bonsai, like, from there? Like, what was did you focus? Obviously, you've worked up and you've started your own nursery now, and you're doing your own thing, which is great, which we'll keep talking about. But what changed in your mindset and how you looked after your trees coming back from staying with Michael?
It changed everything. You would have found when you went to Japan, like, it just, you learn more in that period of time than 3 or 4 years of self-led study. Just time management and the fertilizing regimes, the pest management. And for me, it was an eye-opener to see how to run a nursery on a commercial scale, but also in a temperate climate, which I was new to because I grew up in a sort of a subtropical climate. But one of the things that was difficult for me studying abroad was that before I left, even, my focus was on growing Australian native plants for bonsai, specifically Tasmanian native plants. And that came about after meeting Will Fletcher. And for anyone that's ever been to Will's garden, you walk in there and there's no exotics. It's all pretty much exclusively Tasmanian native plants, and almost exclusively, with the exception of a few collected trees, all been grown from seed or cutting. It's a monumental body of work, and has a different feeling than anything I'd ever experienced. And because when I was working out on the ocean, every weekend I could get away, I would go to the mountains, and the mountains of Tasmania are stunningly beautiful, and the plant species here, you go into the mountains and it is essentially a Japanese garden in a way. It almost looks like someone's been tending it. There's beautifully manicured, almost Niwaki, and pools like tarns and stone. Yeah, so I really wanted to explore that avenue. And because not many people have worked with these species, it's, a lot of the skills are transferable. If you can find a similar species that has a long-standing history in bonsai culture, you can transfer some of that skill set across to these plants. But I also, there's a lot of plant species that no one had ever really worked with before. So needed to spend time, exploring those trees in the flesh to really work out, seasonally how to work with them.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's a lot of work that has to go into the background for all the species that we work with. When we talk about the exotics, it's just someone else has done the hard work. When you talk about the natives, a lot of that hard work relies on people like yourself who are groundbreakers in that space, and then transfer that information onto the rest of the community. Yeah.
But it is that exotic backbone, that traditional, all that technique, that it's totally transferable. All the technical ability, wiring, bending, all that sort of stuff, and a lot of the horticulture. It's more of the sort of the small tidbits, when to prune,
yes,
when to, all that sort of stuff. But I mean, if you look at the phylogenetics of trees, often you can come back along the lineage. So things like the Athrotaxis is not dissimilar to, a redwood in America. They sort of come from the same, so the Caprascaceae or junipers. So, you can apply the techniques that, have traditionally, been developed to those species quite readily, really. And then there's just little tweaks that you can make to get a better outcome.
So you talked about your local area and the mountains and that sort of stuff. Is that where primarily you get your inspiration from? You do a lot of bushwalking and hiking and stuff like that, and you go to some beautiful places. If anyone wants inspiration, jump on Instagram and look up Jarryd, because there's some amazing scenery there that will blow your mind no matter where you are around the world. But I'm thinking from my point of view, like, someone who lives in Melbourne, you're in the, down near Hobart and southernmost state of Australia. Is there particular places that you'd encourage bonsai enthusiasts to go with respect to view the trees in their natural form?
Yeah, certainly. Still with regards to accessibility, which is one of the limiting factors, I guess, to being able to experience what's in the mountain, there's certain places that are easier than others to access. So anyone that's interested in, ancient trees that wants to see some really good sites in Tasmania, places like Mount Field National Park is a great location. If you drive up towards the summits, where the Mount Mawson ski lifts and that sort of thing are, there's some really nice stuff to see. Have
you thought about as part of your business, like doing tours and stuff like that for people to see that sort of stuff? Because I'm sure there'd be a bucket load of people from anywhere that would travel to your part of the world and would put their hand up to see that. I know people travel around America to see that sort of thing. So I reckon that there'd be a lot of people that would jump at it for the chance to see those trees and maybe be educated along the way as well, not just look at them in their natural form, but be educated about them as well.
Yeah, it was something I've definitely considered, and I think this is a great idea to sort of be able to show people these trees in container culture, but also for them to see what they look like in the wild. And it really gives context. So, things like when you see a Shimpaku juniper and it's this contorted Krumholtz form, there's not really anywhere else except for Tasmania in Australia where you can see something that is a rendition of that style. It kind of makes it all click. You go, oh, okay, yeah, that's exactly what this form is representing. These Krumholtz forms in the mountains of ancient conifers. You can look at them in books, but to study them, or on the internet, you can look at photos of Krumholtz, but just to study them in the flesh is something else. And there's an air of antiquity that you can't get
definitely
without being in the environment.
That feeling you get when you walk through an old forest, I don't think that can be replaced by anything really. And as people that are into bonsai obviously love trees, little trees in pots, but to see them in the flesh like that, not only is it going to be inspirational, it's going to be breathtaking as well, I'd assume.
Yeah, and to see trees like this in Australia, and there are other places, definitely. Inland of where I grew up in northern New South Wales, in the Border Ranges, for anyone in that area, you can get up into the Border Ranges National Park, Lamington National Park, Springbrook National Park, and there's a species of the North Vegas that grows up in there, and they're fairly ancient, Some of them exceed 2,000 years old, so there are patches on the mainland. But in Tasmania, there's relic populations, little islands of really ancient Gondwanan flora, and that's where my sort of focus lies. Those areas are stunningly beautiful.
Now, while we're talking about all these beautiful trees in nature and in the wild, we can't skip over the topic of Yamadori, so the collecting of wild grown trees. And I have my own opinions on Yamadori, and I think a lot of people do around the world as well. In Australia, we've got pretty strict laws which restrict the legal collection of a lot of these things. But I just want to talk to you about Yamadori. Obviously, seeing these things in the wild and that desire to grab them, chuck them in the back of the car, take them home, put it into a pot. That's what drives a lot of people. You look through Europe and stuff like that, where they maybe have a more relaxed approach to collecting of these century-old trees and older. I'm not certain that I'd necessarily agree with it, but just what do you think, and how do you go about collecting trees and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so firstly, if you're ever going to collect a tree, you definitely need to have permission from the land tenure. But I mean, when you're talking about ancient trees in Australia, there's not a lot of them, and the ecosystems that can support ancient Yamadori in this country are very rare and very delicate ecosystems. And luckily, most of them are contained within national parks, so it's just no touching. So all just look and enjoy the inspiration that's there. And there's no way to get around having an ancient Athrotaxis in your collection because they grow almost exclusively in the national park. So if someone has one, it's quite obvious where. And it's the same. Yeah, it's the same for Geistelm, which is another beautiful. It's essentially a Shimbaku juniper that grows in the mountains here. The Fagus or Tanglefoot, the North Fagus gunnii, which is the deciduous beech, grows almost exclusively in the national park as well. So those trees, obviously just directly off limits. Yeah, and the other thing is like Tasmania is so small. If it was 20 times the size and these ecosystems were more common, and maybe it wouldn't be as bad a thing to like go and harvest a small number of plants, but because the patches are small and getting smaller every time there's a big fire. But that's one of the other tricky things is you hear a lot of people use fire as a justification to validate collecting. It's easy to validate things,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Anyone can put an argument towards whatever they want, really. Doesn't look right.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the way I go about things is I always make sure that I do collect trees. And well, I obviously never collect from the national park. That's like rule number one. But I also try to collect predominantly from fire impacted ecosystems. So a lot of the ecosystems where there's ancient material, they're fire intolerant. So they're very old ecosystems, and only, that there's a climax community of plants. So that's one of the things to look for is, in Tasmania anyways, it seems to make it a bit more ethical. But I always ensure that I get my permits for the locations that I will collect from. And the land here I collect from is what's deemed as permanent timber production zone land. So in Tasmania, there's a huge native forest logging industry. And, again, you can have your own personal opinions on that. I know where I sit on the issue. But, at the same time, we do need resources. Everyone has, I can see some timber benches sitting behind you, so there's a demand for timber, Yeah, and it has to come from somewhere. And so in Tasmania, there's a lot of forest, and a lot of the timber is extracted. At least it doesn't seem like there's as much. There was a huge wood chipping industry in Tasmania for a while. It's really slowed down, thankfully. But nonetheless, there's a huge tenure that's covered by this permanent timber production zone land, and you can get a permit to collect from that land. And that land is used essentially by the government for resource extraction. So this is the land that I use as my collecting areas. Yeah, and
so it's collected legally and safely and ethically, basically.
Yeah. So that's what we aim to do when we collect plants. But I also don't collect a huge number of trees each season. I sort of aim for quality over quantity. And I've had other collectors sort of scoff at the numbers of trees I collect. They say, "Oh, how many trees do you collect in a day when you go out?" And it's like, "Oh, maybe one." Sometimes I can get 4 trees out on a big mission of a day, So yeah, because you're not using a machine. You're walking into the forest essentially with a frame. So I use a frame that you would use for hunting deer or elk in the mountains, and then find a tree. And it can be quite difficult to find a good tree,
I've had this conversation with people before that, you can dig anything you want. A couple of things you need to be mindful of are, will it survive the digging process? And will it be something that you'll want to look at in 10, 20 years' time, or will it just be another stick in a pot that you've dug because it's just there to be able to be dug in the first place? And I think that you've got to, it's like anything with bonsai, there's got to be something special, a special characteristic before you go through this entire process. Walking for a whole day to get to a site to potentially dig a tree that, you wouldn't go through all that heartache and all that effort if when you got it home it was dead in 2 weeks' time and in the green bin, on the fire. And then if it survives, if you look at it and go, well, it's a piece of rubbish that really is not going to do anything for me, it's never going to make a good quality bonsai. I don't know why you'd go through the process of removing the tree in the first place.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, so, I mean, that's another thing, is that you only want to collect something that has, you know, something unique about it that you wouldn't be able to grow yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just grow it. Why not? You know, and going back to that point about not collecting from the national park and there being species where, you know, they're ideal for bonsai, but you can't collect them. Those are the species which I put the time and effort into growing from seed or from cutting. So, yeah, collecting is a small part of what we do, but we also are growing a huge amount of, you know, the native conifers. Sort of dabbling with the Fagus. It's a bit of a beast to, you know.
It sounds like it certainly sounds like you're going to be a definite permanent part of the Australian bonsai scene, because the great part about Tasmania, well, not the great part, sorry, one of the issues with Tasmania is you can ship trees out of Tasmania, you just can't ship stock into Tasmania. So when we've got people on the mainland like myself or other enthusiasts that are looking for you know, native stock, we can source it through you, or we can buy it through you, get it shipped over here from you. But this is one thing I want to talk to you about, is you can't get stock from the mainland and ship it across. So you're doing a lot of work with all these natives and stuff like that. But that sounds like it's a really logical, smart thing to do, because you've got very limited access to exotics and that sort of thing over there anyway. Yeah,
that's 100% correct. The mainland buyers drain Tasmania of a lot of the best stock. A lot of the exotic trees of high quality are getting and have already been exported from Tasmania. So we're back to, you know, starting again with a lot of them, you know, growing. There's a few growers around that have, you know, held collections of high quality trees. A surprising number, actually, for such a small population. You know, I think there's 500,000 people in Tasmania, and there's a lot of bonsai growers here.
It's fantastic. It's the fresh air down there, mate. Crisp, cold air that clears the brain and makes people want to spend more time with trees.
Yeah, that's it. But you know, there's some hidden gems still left here, and you know, recently I've acquired a couple of really nice sort of traditional or exotic species, just to have a small gallery of, you know, a couple of pines, a couple of maples for people that visit the nursery, you know, that want to see that high quality traditional bonsai, because, you know, still undoubtedly the Japanese bonsai, or, you know, Taiwanese bonsai, or, you know, wherever you're looking to these pillars of bonsai, they're still, well, they're number one in the world for quality, undoubtedly.
Yeah, that's good for, I suppose, for when you have students, or when people come and visit your garden too, to know that there's going to be a broad range too of different species that you work on. It's also, I find myself, it's really important to have a wide range of stock, just so it keeps you fresh and on point, I suppose, with looking after trees. I find that when, you know, I'm about to get into black pine season here in Melbourne, and I know that by the end of June, you know, I can pluck needles in my sleep and wire trees, and it's, you know, it's not a big deal. But then I transition into something else, and I've got to start the ball rolling again and get going with it. So that diversity of species from you as a professional's point of view is really good too, to keep you nimble, and when people do want advice or help or training or anything like that you're ready to go with it, because you've got those species in your garden as well.
Yeah. It's good not to be seen as a one-trick pony, you know.
Definitely. And do you have, like, I got asked this the other day, do you have species envy? Because you do have restricted access to it there, and, you know, we're going to talk about your time up in Canberra recently, and you know, when you get on the mainland and you get on Instagram or whatever, you can see definitely different species. Do you have one particular species envy that you'd sort of wish you had but you don't have down there? No.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I do. Like, I think the good thing about being in a cold climate is you can still grow trees from the warm climate, like tropical and subtropical trees, with the use of a greenhouse. So being down here, and also that's the kind of thing that you could actually get into Tasmania, I think, quite easily. There, you know, I've got a few clients that have recently brought their collections into Tasmania, so I'm starting to find maybe that it might be possible in the future to bring things in. But I really love, Japanese beech. There's not a lot of those of high quality down here. And, I see some of the material that's coming out of, like Leon's grow beds and places like, that are growing exceptional quality stock. And you think, geez, that'd be nice to just to acquire a few of those pieces and work them and sell them or through the nursery, that sort of thing.
Yep.
But I guess I don't have species envy because a lot of the trees that I'm most interested in grow exclusively here and are endemic to Tasmania. So,
hence the reason why you set up down there, mate. Going back to the mainland, you set up down there because it's perfect for you, which is awesome. It's great. It's great to have. I think people, if you've got a map of Australia out as a bonsai enthusiast, you could pretty much travel around Australia and drop into a lot of different bonsai professionals' personal setups or their nurseries and that sort of thing, and you'd have a great holiday with it too, and you'd see diversity of styling and species and all that sort of stuff. So it's awesome. Yeah,
I think diversity is so important in the bonsai realm.
You find that based on Tassie and the cold climate and stuff like that, do you have particular pest and disease issues that you encounter more frequently, or do you find that there's less impact down there with pest and disease because it's depending on the species obviously, and regimes for spraying and maintenance and all that sort of stuff, do you find that you trip across something consistently like fungal disease?
Probably a higher, like sooty mold we have a big issue with in this sort of climate, but I mean that's a secondary issue that comes from poor pest management, but I find a lot of the time I have a lot of issues with eucalyptus because we are sort of surrounded by large eucs. So it seems like a lot of the pests that they have rain down onto the smaller eucalypts, and that seems to be a bit of an issue. But I wouldn't say that we have any more issue than anyone else with regards to pests and fungal issues. Maybe there could be slightly higher fungal loading here potentially, but there's not a huge nursery trade down here. And also because of the quarantine coming into Tasmania, it's quite good. We don't seem to have huge loadings of, harmful fungal spores, so we don't have myrtle rust. It's here in very small amounts. But
it's managed.
Yeah, it's managed, and things like Phytophthora sort of kept under control to an extent. So, it's there, but I don't think we have anything further. And, good management of the issues. I tried for the last few seasons to use quite an organic approach to pest control.
How'd that go?
Yeah, not too well. I feel like you're playing catch up a lot of the time. So I've just moved to, because the quality of the trees it's just too risky. So I've just moved to systemic insecticide. And I try to avoid my impact on the environment so I'm using a pelletized systemic that's taken up through the root system. You put it into the soil and sort of like a slow release. So that avoids spraying. But I mean, if I was to spray, I would make sure that I do it early in the morning before the bees are up and about, and wouldn't spray anything that's flowering, all those sorts of things. And, I would never broadcast spray,
No.
I've liked this pelletized insecticide because, it seems like it's a very topical.
Is it readily available, the pelletized thing? Or is it something you can buy, like an enthusiast could buy at their local hardware store?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the chemical name. It's like it's the same chemical that's in Confidor, essentially. And you can't buy it at the hardware store, but you can buy it online. And I've found, I wouldn't know the exact product, but there's a few of them out there that do the same thing.
While we're talking about this too, before I get asked all the questions further down the track, my approach with spraying and maintenance on the trees is, which I've said before, and I'll make it pretty clear with everybody, is that it's always the health of the tree that's my first and foremost concern. And I find that having healthy, strong trees, the natural defences they've got, are often more than enough to manage it. But I'm always on the front foot with my spraying to make sure that my trees stay at peak condition. And priority one is always the health of the tree and its maintenance, its ongoing maintenance. So if I find that I've got pest and disease or pests on there, like, aphids or whatever it is, then I'll treat those with something, a contact spray, then move on to trying to identify what the actual root cause of the problem is, which is often not being repotted. First and foremost, because the tree can't get nutrients and it can't build its strength, and it's becoming, a bit pot bound, and that normally is where most of my issues stem from. So, I think what Jarryd's doing with his systemic is it's via pellet form is a brilliant idea as far as localizing the damage to the natural insects around. It's a byproduct normally of sprays like Confidor that sort of have a high impact on the bee population. So doing it that way, mate, it's pretty smart. Now listen, what would be the best piece of advice that you would give someone? So someone says to you, what one thing would you tell me that will change my bonsai life? What would that be?
Seek out a good teacher.
Ah, there you go. Yeah, true. I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. And do whatever it is that you're most passionate about, grow the species that you want to grow. And, if you want to experiment, explore and experiment, I think it's good to approach it with a creative mind and not approach it as a mimicry of other people's work. I think it's great to sort of forge your own path. To an extent, you need to know the basics before you go off the path. But yeah,
there's always horticultural foundations that we all have to abide by, regardless. So that's one thing that I push quite heavily is that you can design a tree to look how you want, but horticulturally you're always going to have the same constraints as everyone else around the world that's doing bonsai. So you can make the tree look how you want, whether it stays alive in that format. Or in that form is another thing, because the horticulture is always going to dominate and overrule whatever design features you put onto a tree. But yeah, I agree. I think thinking about it, it wasn't going to be my answer. What would be the number one thing I'd tell people? Mine would be patience. It would be just draw breath and don't keep chasing that elusive perfect bonsai. Just to draw breath and sit back and enjoy the ride along the way, because the further along you get, the more you enjoy the slower times with the trees. But I think getting a good teacher is ideal, and sticking with them I think is the second part to that. Now, for your own personal bonsai life, if there was one thing that you could change, what would it be?
That's a challenging question. Well, I'd love a studio. At the moment, I'm still working out of the greenhouse, and the studio is in the process of being built. So, definitely once the studio is built, I think that's going to be a huge game changer. Because working in the greenhouse through summer is just it's not possible. I can work in the house, but it's not the same. So I need that space to function at, the level I want to be functioning at, and to teach display, which I think is like one of those final pillars of bonsai art, is that display. But also, like, if I'm being wishful, I'd love for the fagus, the only deciduous tree, to be just a smidge easier to grow. Maybe have a stronger root system on it, or I don't know, maybe for someone to tell me that little secret spice that it needs to grow flawlessly, or for there to be an abundant supply of them, But, yeah.
It's good. And then going back to your studio and stuff like that, that's something that I think everyone that's listening to, this podcast has been recorded in May 2021, and I think that hopefully someone listens to this, 5-10 years down the track, and then suddenly visits and has a look at your property, because I've been there myself, and the development that you're doing and the work that you're doing on it is something which is going to draw a lot of visitors to that area, and also a lot of local people that will become, long-term invested into your approach to bonsai. That's what I think is something that I'd like to push myself, is having known you now for a little while. knowing your approach, your consistency of dealing with certain species, and your general love and admiration for the wilderness is something which is portrayed and pushed, and it's such a great thing for us to have in the Australian bonsai community, mate, that you're to be commended for it. And I think that the work that you're putting in to your garden and to the time that you're putting into young stock now, that 10, 15, 20 years down the track, or even 2 years down the track, is going to be something which all of Australia is going to benefit from, because it's going to be hard for you to lock the borders and stop shipping stuff out of there, because once the word gets out and once people start seeing what you're doing and producing and stuff like that, I'm sure people on the mainland are going to start tripping over themselves to try and get hold of it, knowing that it's produced or grown in such a way that's not damaging the environment. It's not being ripped out of national parks and stuff like that. So that clear conscious of purchase is going to be there with a lot of stuff that you've done, and knowing that you've done it the right way too. There's a lot of people that throw something in a pot that maybe shouldn't, or don't look after it to a point where when the fresh bonsai enthusiast gets hold of it, that it can stay alive long term. Whereas you do the hard yards first, so when someone does take it away, it's a tree that's going to outlast them, and that's brilliant, I reckon.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Now, we caught up in Canberra in March. Was it March? Yeah, March. So we caught up and we did something up there at the National Collection. It's called Bonsai Reshaped. If anyone wants to search through for it, you might see some photos or videos or something like that on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. So what did you get out of that?
Well, firstly, it was the first time I'd actually been able to make it to the National Collection, which ashamedly it's a bit of a pilgrimage for me. That was fantastic, to see a collection of some of the best trees from around Australia in one place, and in such good condition as well. Lee and Sam do a fantastic job of maintaining the collection, but also the space. It's a beautiful space to present bonsai in. So that was fantastic to see that. And I got to see some trees from familiar names, and some of the best trees from those people. So that was great. But also to work alongside yourself and Khan, that was pretty.
That was pretty cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, I really felt honoured to be invited up there for the event. So that was great, and it was really great to share some of the Tasmanian flora and to see Australian native plants being worked, on the main stage. For me,
first and foremost, it was great. I reckon that native angle on it was fantastic.
Yeah, so that was really good, and I do love that as a trajectory for Australian bonsai. Obviously, I love exotic plants equally. Well, maybe not quite. But
bias towards the native, mate.
I do have a slight bias towards native plants. So it was great to see, recognition, because there has been a lot of people trailblazing. There's Derek Oakley from Western Australia and Will Fletcher down here, and there's a number of other people across the country that have been sort of working away quietly for a lot of years. And so it's nice to see, native plants given center stage
recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so on that point then, it was talking about there was three of us on stage at one time, which is the first time I've done that, which was great because they picked the three different, you, myself, and Han, for the different styling approaches that we have with our trees, which was awesome. And I think having native stock styled differently or styled the way that we'd like to have them in our collection was great. But where do you see Australian? I'm not talking native bonsai, but where do you see bonsai in Australia heading in the next 5-10 years? Like, what direction, or where do you see us going as a community?
it seems like we have a lot of momentum at the moment.
Sure do.
And I feel like the focus is moving towards quality. I think for a lot of years there was a focus on big trunks, you know, at the expense of quality. And this is an opinion, but you know, a big trunk is one thing, and it's to be admired in its own right. But I think a push to something something a bit more subtle, you know, focusing on branch refinement finally. You know, we've grown trunks finally, and now we're moving towards refinement. And that, for me, that's really exciting because, you know, I mentioned earlier, I think display is that final pillar. And, you know, you look back at early Japanese bonsai, where we're sitting right now, not dissimilar to where they were, in the 60s or maybe a little bit earlier than that. So I think as the time, you know, starts to overlay onto the trees with, you know, through the right care, the Bonsai Open on the Central Coast, I think, will become hopefully something quite interesting. Because we do need these exhibitions to sort of, you know, a bit of a competitive nature to push the quality higher and higher.
It's definitely something to aim for, a target to try and aspire to.
Yeah, that's it. So, you know, like people like yourself and Quintin around your area have, you know, and Marcella have excellent quality trees, and you give people something to aspire to. And, you know, when you put those, it's almost a challenge to people to, you know, to raise the standard when you're seeing trees of that caliber, you know, put onto the show table. So I think we're just going to see, and also that a lot of these trees that people have been working on are finally, you know, trees that have been grown from scratch in Australia. We've grown a lot of our material from scratch, and it's finally starting to come to that, to bear the fruits of that labor. So I think the refinement of those pieces is really going to bring bonsai culture in Australia, you know, to a bit of a peak, hopefully soon, a sustained peak, I'd assume.
Yeah, I think that where we're accelerating now, my opinion on it is that going back again to the horticultural stuff, that we're focusing more on that, and we're a lot smarter now and educated than what we used to be, and we're focusing more on. Well, I know personally myself, I focus far more on the roots of the tree as opposed to the trunk of the tree, and I'm a great believer that if you can work out the base of the tree and get the foundation correct on that tree via its roots with the mediums that we use and fertilizing and all that sort of stuff and positioning and stuff like that, then the rest of the tree can develop quite quickly. You know, you can, you know, within a 5-year period, not a deciduous tree, of course, but sort of a pine or something like that, within 5-year period with a good foundation, you can develop quite quickly where you get to. So 5, 10, 15, 20 years time, like those trees are going to be some of the best in the world, if they're not there already, for some of the people that have got collections that you mentioned around the place. So I believe that we're accelerating faster now because we've got an open era of information sharing between people like you and I, and other professionals around Australia too do the same thing. And we've got this sort of internal network of people where we're passing on as much information through the social media platforms as you possibly can. And I know contactability for myself, you know, the phone runs hot with text messages from people that have literally done a course yesterday with me to today. They've been out and purchased something, and they're wanting their confidence built up and sort of to say, hey, look, what do you think? And, you know, having access to that, I know from my point of view, if, you know, going back, I don't know, 20, 30 years, whatever it is, if I had access to someone like me on the other end of the phone, or someone like you getting a text and saying, hey, look, it'll be okay, and have you thought about this, or don't do that, wait, you know, that sort of thing is where people stay in bonsai, and that's where bonsai community starts to grow. And what's good for bonsai is good for all of us. The more people are in bonsai, the better it is for everybody, because the more money gets thrown at it from, you know, like the National Collection up in Canberra. That's such a visionary thing to have done in Australia, that it's brilliant, and I hope it grows massively because it deserves it.
Yeah, and it's a great facility for maintaining our treasures. You know, so I see them as, you know, these treasures of the art that are created, you know, by, you know, people throughout time, and to have somewhere safe for those to land, that don't just disappear or go to a collection of someone that maybe can afford them, but
can't look after them.
Ability to keep them up to the standard that they need.
And you talked about you talked about the trees getting to a level with the show up in Central Coast. I think that the National Collection is something that everyone, and I've said it before, that people should aspire to get one of their trees at least into that collection during their lifetime in bonsai, because that, it's different. It comes out of Tassie, it can't return to Tassie, but, and same as Western Australia, but really the target should be that you've got something good enough and high enough level that it can get into that collection for a period of time, 1, 2 years, whatever they decide to keep it for. But I think if we had that sort of a target ongoing, then that'd be awesome for our bonsai community, because then everywhere starts to get better and better and starts to develop. And like I said, the better our shows become, the more people that get interested in bonsai, the bigger our community becomes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So now you're a man in demand. How do people get in touch with you, mate? So you got someone on the mainland who wants to talk to you about coming down and doing, visiting your nursery, acquiring stock, doing an intensive training with you, or something like that. How's it best for people to get in touch with you?
So through my website is generally the best way to get in contact with me, or through Facebook or Instagram. Those are also quite easy methods of contact. After that, via phone is always the best.
Give us the details. What's the website?
So www.montanebonsai.com, or Montane Bonsai is the handle on Instagram, same as on Facebook. So you can look that up, and if you want to get in contact with me and you're chasing something, Tasmanian native plant, or, want some advice or information or anything, or you want to come visit the nursery, don't hesitate to contact me, because, we love showing people what we're working on here. There's no point creating bonsai unless you get to share it with people that are going to appreciate it.
And the cool part is that you can, I know you've done it for me, but you can organise the shipping of trees over to the mainland too. If someone gets a sparkle in their eye about one of your trees, then that can be coordinated as well. So you've got the door-to-door service available.
Yeah, we're always happy to ship. Generally, it's easiest to capital cities, but if there's a will, generally find a way. Yeah,
definitely. Well, I can tell you, mate, you're one of the nice blokes in bonsai around the world. So thanks for coming online today with us for the podcast, and it's lovely to chat, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more chats coming up with you down the track, mate. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure as always, Scott. I can't wait to catch up with you again in the flesh.
Yeah, sounds good, mate. We'll have that beer very soon.
Yeah, look forward to it.
All right, see you, mate.
See you, mate.
How good was that? Right, so if you want to get in touch with Jarryd, it's just to go over it again, it's Montane Bonsai, Montane Bonsai. So his website is montanebonsai.com, or you can be emailed on jarrydbailey1@gmail.com. So JARRYDBAILEY1@gmail.com. Or I tell you what, you can just reach out to me, scott@bonsaimatsu.com, via the website bonsaimatsu.com, via Instagram, via Facebook, anywhere you normally get in touch with me, and I can put you in direct contact with Jarryd. So it's a busy time now for us as we head into the latter part of May and get towards the dormancy period for our trees. So for me, I'm about to get into a lot of the black pines and pines in general with a nice clean up and styling. It's a really exciting time of year. It's when I get to make my trees look the best they possibly can. So there's going to be another podcast coming pretty soon. And you never know, it may develop into a bit of YouTube footage and that sort of stuff as well. So stick around, enjoy. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening as always. And I'll look forward to catching you next time. Until then, happy bonsai.